What's that? A Discourse in Magic episode released on a Monday? What is going on? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 196th episode of Discourse in Magic with the one and only Paul Gertner. This was so much fun, such a great episode. I recently got a chance to go down to Boston and check out Paul's show, Miracles and Other Deceptions, and it was fantastic. And in this episode, I got an opportunity to not only chat about the show, but also hear some of Paul's epic stories, like his working with Johnny Carson, some of his time on Penn and Teller Fool Us, as well as some behind-the-scenes wisdom and advice about things like kicker endings and twist endings, which I think Paul is a real expert in. Anyways, this was such a fun episode. I really enjoyed it, and I think you will too. Here it is, a wonderful time with the one and only Paul Gertner. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah Babbins, and we are here with the one and only Paul Gertner. Paul, how are you?
I am doing great.
I am super excited to chat with you. You know, I've known your magic for a very long time. I came to see the show in Boston, which was epic for a lot of reasons, and we'll touch on that. And very excited to now sit down and interview you and talk about some of your history and some of the lessons that you have learned in the world of magic. So let's get started. Let's start at the very beginning. How did you get started in magic? How did you get bit by the bug?
Wow. I can remember being fascinated by those advertisements on the back of comic magazines, and the ventriloquist advertisements, the ones that showed a magic trick, the ones that showed Aikido. I remember that one, how you could flip somebody in the air with a touch of a finger or so on like that. And they had these great little graphics. I was fascinated by it, but I don't know if I ever ordered any of the magic from the books. There wasn't much cash around in our day to even buy anything like that. But I got bit by that concept, and I remember going to I went to the library. I think a magician came to our school when I was 10, and he did, a nice little stage magic show for everybody. And I was fascinated by a couple things. He did a vanishing wand trick where he had to put a wand, not a wand, but a cane, wrapped it up in newspaper, and it was gone. And that one fascinated me a lot. And I went to the library and found out that there were actually books on this topic. And so I started getting library books and out of the library, Carnegie Library, and studying them and reading, which obviously then made me read about magicians and Houdini and Blackstone and Thurston and so on like that. But I was also learning, some simple card tricks too from those books. But I didn't know a magic shop existed or anything like that. I didn't know anything about that. And but so basically from about age 10 to age 16, I was kind of on my own studying magic just from library books and making little props and things like that.
So you were in the library. Were there any specific books that kind of led you on that journey in the library?
Yeah, I mean, I remember early on all the Bruce Eliot books were the ones that I got, and then Walter Gibson always had great books about Houdini and so on. But the Bruce Eliot ones, they had silks and handkerchiefs and some rope magic and so on. And maybe I didn't learn a whole ton of them. I was very quickly drawn toward, fascinated by the close-up or the card magic, mainly for a couple reasons. Number one, I had a deck of cards, and number two, I didn't have a silk that had a special pocket in it, and I had no idea how you could get one, how to make one or anything. But I do remember they had an egg and a silk trick, and I was fascinated by that, where you would have a fake egg and put a silk inside the egg, and it would turn into an egg if this egg was hidden in your hand. But again, didn't know where to get one or anything. Didn't know they made them. And I carved one. I carved one out of lye soap. My grandmother used lye soap. I mean, she was from Ireland, and that's how she washed her clothes for all those 11 kids. So I took a big hunk of lye soap and carved out an egg and made a nice sized egg, and then hollowed out the inside as thin as I could get it before it would crack and break. And I'm sure I did it a number of times before I got one that was pretty thick, but sort of worked, And so I had my lye egg soap, and I would turn a little red handkerchief or a little red cloth. It wasn't a handkerchief; it was just a cloth, I guess, into an egg. But so yeah, magic books like that. Now You See It, Now You Don't by Bill Tarr. That was another one I remember. And tricks you can do with cards. William Turner was a paperback book, probably the first book I bought on card magic in a standard bookstore. I saw Tricks with Cards. I still see the picture of it in my head. So I learned a little bit on my own for quite a few years, from age 10 to 15, about till I met some other magicians.
It sounds like the origins of you rolling up your sleeves and getting into the magic started quite early with some soap. Talk to me about your discovery of the world of magic then. So maybe magic stores or magicians or conventions.
Yeah, that was really eye-opening because you're reading these books and you're reading these stories about all these crazy magicians traveling the world, and they had these props and equipment, and you sort of didn't really know where they came from, and you assumed they built them all, which they did in many cases. But I then met a magician. I think my mother had met a lady on the bus, and this lady happened to mention to my mother her husband was a magician, or my mother mentioned my son's a magician, one way or another. In any event, they said, "Oh, well, they have to meet." And sure enough, he lived only about a mile away from me, from where I lived. And his name was Ron Slanina, and he still lives in Naples, Florida now. He's retired. Ron's about 83 now, but he was 15 years older than me, and I was 16 years old when I met him. Went to his house the very first time I remember, and I remember going there, and I had really practiced up on there was a move called the glide with cards, and just basic card move that you learned in the library books. And I had really practiced, and I thought I had it done pretty well. And I was going to fool this guy, and another magician. I was going to fool him really bad. And I went and did my card tricks for him, a couple of card tricks. He says, "Yeah, very good." He was very nice. And then he picked up a coin, and he says, "Do you know how to palm a coin?" And I says, "Well," I knew what palming meant, and I picked up the coin and put it in my center of my palm, and I said, "Like this." And I remember him picking up the coin from my hand, and he placed it in his hand, and he opened his hand, and the damn coin was gone. And he said, "No, I mean like this." Boom, coin gone. And I still remember that moment. It was like an explosion in my head. Like, what the hell happened? It was the first time I had ever seen someone vanish a coin up close. And my head just blew open, and I realized exactly at that moment that there's a whole nother level besides these library books, and I have no clue what's going on here. And then he did the bottle cap routine that used to be called Chink a Chink, and Albert Boschman did with the bottle cap assembly. And again, same thing. What the hell is going on? And I, of course, went back to his house next week and the next week after. And every Thursday, his wife was bowling. I would go for magic lessons. And we, on Thursday nights for the next 5 years, I'd say from age 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, I would go to his house pretty much every Thursday. And we would just go through those books, Talisman, Kabbalah, Hierophant, everything, all the magazines, Kabbalah, I mean, everything, and we'd go through them page by page and learn trick from trick and pick out the ones we wanted to learn. And so he opened my whole world up and then, of course, very quickly, he introduced me to the fact that there was a magic club in town and the fact that there was a magic shop in town, the House of Enchantment with Jim Schwoger. First book I bought at Schwoger's magic shop was Bobo's. So my main was amazing for me was I had access to information at the age of 16 that I normally would not have seen for another 5 to 10 years.
And you also had people willing to work with you on it. Definitely having someone working with you to kind of help show you the ropes is another incredible opportunity.
It was, because what it was like was having a DVD or a videotape player right in front of me. He could show me how good the coin. Now, maybe he didn't do it as perfect as Slidini did, but he could show me how good the trick could look. That was always the thing about learning magic back then. You could read it in a book, you could make an assumption that you're doing it pretty well, but you had no clue until you went to a magic convention and you met Eddie Fector, and Eddie Fector palmed the card, and you says, "Oh,
Oh, like that, right.
that's what it's supposed to look like."
Oh, they weren't supposed to
Oh,
see it.
oh,
Oh.
yeah, right. I mean, oh, I wasn't even supposed to know you had it in your hand. And so that was interesting. But yeah, Ron was very, very so influential. And I mean, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if it weren't for him.
Talk to me about kind of the next step of the journey. I know that obviously magic became a profession for you, but I also know that you kind of had your hand a little bit in competitions. What came first, and how did that influence your career?
Yeah, it was definitely the building of the magic base of knowledge and I think of skill sets. I think working with Ron all those years from the age 16 to about 20 or whatever, 18, 19, 20, I got the skill sets sort of there to develop the skill and ability and technical ability. And I didn't get right away into the competitions, but so I started putting together some original magic. I didn't realize it was original. I bought the set of cups, and I had found a steel ball in the basement, Dad's toolbox, and steel balls, metal cups just sounded like an interesting concept, just because I liked the sound element. So I was doing some things like that, some coin tricks, a bit of coin magic. Cards were starting to develop, but I didn't know I was really doing that much original because I was kind of just in my Pittsburgh area, except for the local magic club, that'd make a fuss about what I was doing, and that was nice. So then I went to one magic convention in Buffalo, New York, my very first magic convention in Buffalo, New York, with a guy named Mac Picnic. And so we went to this convention, and I stayed and roomed with Mac, and I saw Flip from Holland. I saw Eddie Fector. I saw Derek Dingle was there performing. I saw these really good performers. And so I realized, Ron was good and he was very, very good, but there were also guys on another level too that were doing out there professionally and so on. And so I attended that convention. And I guess very quickly that same year, I think I heard when I was at that convention, we were in Buffalo, New York. They said, we're going to go over see this guy named Eddie Fector. I hadn't seen him yet. He was performing at the convention a couple of days later. But he has a bar called the Forks Hotel, and we're going to go over there. You want to join us? Sure, of course. And I went, and we saw Eddie. It was amazing just watching him entertain an audience with a deck of cards. He was phenomenal. So that was the next step, was where I started to see, okay, fine, I've got all this technical skill. There's a performing ability here that I certainly don't have. I don't know how to do that, but I then went the next year. I heard they have a magic convention every year at Fector's in April, and it was called the Fector's 4F convention. And so I went up. I was supposed to go up with my friend Ron, but he kind of something happened. He couldn't make it. He had a family and work got in the way, and so I ended up going to drive up on my own. But then my car broke down and it
Oh
was an
man.
old. Yeah, so I hitched, and I hitched
Wow.
Pittsburgh, Buffalo, which was not uncommon in those days. I mean, I did it a lot, you know, and I hitched and got up to Buffalo that year for the convention with a little briefcase of magic. I don't even know if I had clothes with me or anything. I think probably had a little bag of clothes or whatever, but because I had no hotel or anything, I just magic convention. I'm going, yeah, and I got there and it was raining and I came in like a drowned rat because I had long hair and I was just 16, I don't know, 18-year-old kid at that point, and they were very nice to me. And then somebody saw me do some magic, and they said, "Eddie's got to see you." And they sat me down in front of Eddie and said, "Do your cups and balls, do your stuff," you know. And it was kind of a life-changing moment because they made a big fuss about it. And all of a sudden, I was the closing performer on the convention that year. You know, they just for the final act, they put this kid from Pittsburgh and I was doing a flip stick routine and the cups and balls, and it was like being in a dream world, you know.
What do you think it was that led you to be able to kind of have a unique spin on magic when maybe many of the people around you either were not or weren't developing in the same sort of way that you were?
I mean, I think there's definitely a natural ability on some level, just like you take two people and say, "Hey, we're going to both teach you how to play the piano." You come back 5 years later, and one is playing sonatas, and the other is still plunking around with do re mi. And now again, that also has to do with the fact that the guy's that playing really well has a passion for it, and he's practiced a hell of a lot. So I think that there was definitely an obsession. I mean, 10, 12 hours a day during high school vacations from high school in the summer, that was nothing. That was just, of course, my mom accepted that. My family accepted it. It's what I did. I just worked nothing, but I was obsessed with it. And so I think the practice came into play a lot. But I was fascinated by the creativity end of it, the creating tricks fairly early on, and coming up with some original material.
Because there's a certain amount of that innovation, which is the exciting part to magicians, but also, like, more specifically, to show magicians a cups and balls routine that is worth talking about is something, right? But it means that you must have kind of reached outside of the box and found something, and you do that very often. So I'm kind of trying to get at, like do you intentionally say, like, okay, let me pull a bit of creative or unique or historical thing, like these, balls that make a sound, or are you just playing and then all of a sudden someone says, wow, that's good, and you're like, oh, this, like, what is that like for you? What's that experience?
A lot of times it just simply is a bold idea. It's usually an association of something. For example, I can give you a very distinct one. For a while, I was doing an act called Brain Drops, or a show. It was a one-man show called Brain Drops, which involved technology and iPads and iPhones and so on like that. And at one point, I find it interesting. Some magicians did not like it at all. But I did a bit where I would hold an iPad up to my face, and eventually an image would appear on the iPad, which was essentially me. I was basically using an iPad as a mask, okay, as a mask. And then my image would appear on the iPad. And I actually did a whole act where I then let go of the iPad and it stayed suspended on my face, okay? And I would do an act to a Willie Nelson's tune, a Willie Nelson tune about sort of a lost love affair and so on like that. With little props would appear, and there was a second deal involved. And at one point, I pick up a cigarette and hold it up to the iPad and take a puff and blow it out, and smoke comes from up behind the iPad. There's some really great magic in it and fun stuff. Now, where did that idea come from? I was sitting on an airplane, and in my head, I says, there's something with technology, because somebody had just shown me an iPad first time about a month before, and I'm saying this is like a magic trick if you could do something with it. And I was looking at a magazine, and on the magazine was a person's face, full face, and I'm looking at it and I'm saying to myself, wait a minute, that magazine is the same size as an iPad. And that face is the same size as a human face. And if I hold that magazine up to my face, it would look like a mask. What if I held an iPad up to my face and the mask changed into a moving image that actually started talking or speaking or singing and so on? And I thought, what if I left go of the iPad and it stayed suspended on my face? Now, at first, I had no idea how to do it, but eventually I worked out methods. So sometimes a weird association or idea will happen, and that's what will do that. So I like combinations of existing tricks and techniques.
Would you be unsatisfied or dissatisfied, rather, if you did a trick that didn't have something else, an original spin, something out of the
Yeah,
box?
yeah. No, there are certain routines I'll do that fit that category. See, I think people stop thinking way too soon, and it's easy to do because a magic trick surprises you. Boom, there it is. That's it. Oh, that's great. You got everything you want. No, you didn't get everything you want, because maybe there's something else. Maybe there's another secondary surprise, or maybe there's another surprise that has an emotional content to it. So if you can take and incorporate those elements, there was a very nice routine they used to call the nudist deck routine, with a deck of cards. The Hall's mental photography, showing cards, they're blank, and then they print, and then they're back, and so on. And I've done that routine for many years, but I did add a little touch to it. I added a touch that the card box, which is initially blank, eventually becomes printed too and has a back on the card box. So yes, so that's a little touch that I added to that routine, just because I felt it added another little element to it. But if a routine is really well designed, start to finish, I have no problem taking it and saying that's pretty good. I don't really see any way I can make that a little better, but still, I'm probably going to play with it a little bit.
I think part of the process is just the playing, right?
Hmm.
Is just the actually having fun with it. I want to talk about some of or kind of a trend that I see in a lot of your magic, which not all people know how to get right exactly. And that's the idea of the like surprise ending or a twist ending or a kicker ending. And it's a very challenging thing to do because sometimes it takes the whole premise of the effect totally off of its wagon. And we've seen that before. And you continuously do it where we're either seeing coins multiplying or dice being very big or you know, the jumbo steel balls, or just literally all the time during that show. It felt like you produced like the entire two suitcases worth of stuff, you know, like came out of nowhere. So talk to me a little bit about that, like why you like that kind of thing, and sort of how somebody can add or think about adding interesting or twist or kicker or surprise endings without screwing up or undermining the whole trick.
The original influence of that was definitely had to do with the close-up magician Don Allen for me, and Albert Goshman. Those would be two very big influences in terms of, you know, I knew both of them. I got to meet both of them, fortunately, and hang out with them a little bit over the years. But Don Allen did a lot with the big giant silver nut, like a nut and bolt, a nut appearing underneath the hat, or a lump of coal, I think, at one point. Goshman, of course, had his salt shakers, and there was always the surprise element of the salt shaker continuing to appear. Every once in a while, a bigger coin would appear, and so on. So I always liked that impact of visual surprise. And so that was probably what drew me to some of those routines initially, because I was influenced by them. But the magic also, it has to have a reason, though, for happening. It is a little tricky because you can take and destroy a trick. I would say destroy, but you can kind of destroy a trick by just adding so many surprises. I've seen people do this with a competition act or so on like that, and things appear and appear and appear and more appear and more appear. And it really, after a while, I don't really care. you know? and I think the audience starts feeling the same way sometimes. The problem with kickers is sometimes people have to think. If they make them have to think too much, you don't want them to have to think in that moment too much. They have to understand what they're seeing, and they have to be able to internalize it very, very quickly. It's like if you're doing a mind reading effect or so on like that, and you take them along the lines, and they've written down, say, the name of a person that they knew, maybe the first person they kissed or something like that, and you're able to get the first initial of the name, and then actually you get the first name, and then maybe can I try for can you remember the last name? Yeah, let me just try it. Let me try it. The T, does that, and then they freak out. How did you know it's Tagalog? That's the first boy I met. How do you know? And then you can, if there's a reason for doing it. I've done things like where I've also had that same person write down, a street address where they met this person or so, and you say, does this mean anything? 112. Now they freak out even more because it says 112. There's no way, because you've kind of built it up and so on like that. But again, sometimes the kickers can be too much, and I'm in the wrong direction. I played with that a lot on Penn and Teller Fool Us, where I added, like, for my Coke can, I added a Coca-Cola can appearing, and it worked, and it's what I thought would fool them, but they kind of took a general guess, and I kind of said, well, yeah, close enough, but it's a real nice visual appearance, and but they weren't expecting that. But again, the reason for the Coke can appearing was because I did build a little storyline in the very beginning about how the first time my dad saw me do this trick, was the time we had a drink together. He poured himself a beer, and he poured a little glass in front of me and poured me a Coke. And so the Coke can was obviously a callback to the origination of the storyline. And but so again, the kickers are fun to add if there's a reason for them to exist.
I love that, and I think maybe a little bit of insight for people into thinking about developing their own kicker endings and twist endings, and just kind of trying to be wary that you stay in theme and that you understand what the effect is, right? And then it's a lot easier to see where a kicker can come from, and how to make it all make sense.
so a good question to ask yourself is, why are you doing something? And in the mind of the audience, from the audience's perspective, what are they seeing? And the thing about kickers is they just have to. At least there has to be a thread that builds back. Like when I did one where with a bunch of dealing with people spelling people's names on Penn and Teller Fool Us, and I had sort of dropped in the beginning that this trick worked because supposedly the guy that originated it had a royal flush in spades at the end when he was a poker player. Well, I got that royal flush in spades out there so that at the end of the trick, after I find everyone's card on the top of the 5 piles I've dealt, I then say, oh, but that wasn't going to fool Penn and Teller. If I turn over the cards, each packet, there's a royal flush in spades at the end, and the people go, oh yeah, royal flush in spades, boom. And it was a kicker, and that's actually the kicker that did fool Penn and Teller. And the same thing I did with Unshuffled, where I did the standard Unshuffled routine, and it ends usually with the name appearing on the side of the deck. But that wasn't going to fool them because they knew the trick already. He had bought my book. So I added one more shuffle, and now it says Penn and Teller on the side of the deck. So I developed a method to do it on the show that would fool them. It was successful. It fooled them. It happened to hit really well. I mean, everything worked perfect and so on like that. And it was a very hard for people to figure out, even on YouTube where they analyze these things like crazy. But I've developed a third method for that same trick. So when it says Penn and Teller, I'm using a totally different method. So sometimes when magicians come to my show, they say, wait a minute, you didn't do the original method. You didn't do the method you did on Penn and Teller, foolish. What the hell did you do? You got me, well, it's a new method. And again, because situation and performance environments change. And so the methods have to change too. So even if it's a kicker, so there's 3 different kickers, method tricks and, 3 different methods.
It's not only that there is a kicker, but also developing the right method for it. And again, it kind of comes down to the creativity and the playing and the having fun and just saying like, okay, figured out one way to do it, and now let's figure out another, right? And let's figure out a way that may work in a different situation or whatever it needs.
It's true, and that's why I would say to anybody learning magic or sort of starting, that's why you want to have as wide of a base of skill sets as possible. Okay, because in order to do the third kicker method I'm using in Unshuffled, I had to know how to do some movements with deck switches and things like that. Okay,
right.
So I don't think anything you learn in terms of magic techniques, whether it's the ability to build a prop or the ability to do a bottom deal, I don't think any of them ever are wasted time. I think eventually you'll find a use for a technique, and then it's the matter of putting those different techniques together in an interesting manner.
Let's talk a little bit about Penn and Teller itself, because you've been on that show 3 times and just done an absolutely amazing job of featuring magic, obviously fooling them 2 of those times, but just showcasing magic and also showcasing kind of the inventive nature of the type of magic that you do. Talk about that experience and anything important you want to highlight about that journey for you.
Well, it was an interesting thing because I wasn't supposed to be on the show initially. What happened was, I think I probably talked to Mike Close about it early on, and but I never really sent anything in or anything like that. And Mike, it was pretty upfront with me early on. I think he says, they are kind of, he says, we're fighting them a little bit on the demographic. They're 18 to 35's their demo, and they're really, really pushing for the young folks. So he says, he had said, feel free to send something in if you want, but he says there's no guarantees on it. That's what we're dealing with the producers. And I was, so I listened to that and I kind of said, yeah, okay. I never sent anything in. And then a friend of mine, Lee Trebosic, real good magician out of Pittsburgh, who I've been a bit of a mentor toward, and he's doing great stuff now. Lee calls me up and says, Paul, he says, I got a contract here to be on Penn and Teller. And I said, and he says, guess what they want me to do? And I says, I bet they want Unshuffled, don't they? And he says, yeah, that's what they want. And he said, I said to him, he asked, he said, how do you feel? And I said, well, it is a show about kind of creation and invention. Let me at least think about it. And I talked to Mike about it, and he said, yeah, that's what we're dealing with. He says, they saw the trick, they love the trick, they want the trick. That's where we're at. And but so I don't know what happened exactly, but a few days later, I get a call from Johnny Thompson saying, Paul, we want you on the show. So Johnny, I think, kind of said, "Nah, if you really want the trick, the guy's not dead yet.
Totally.
You gotta have the guy that's on." And Lee was cool about it because Lee had already said to them, "Hey, look, I'm
Right.
not feeling
He
comfortable
called
here."
you, so he already
He had
felt good
called
about it,
me, and
right?
he sent an email to them saying, "Hey, I'd really prefer you use Paul if you." So I think a couple forces went together. So anyway, I got on the show, which was good because it kind of, I thought it was win-one for the old guys, and and uh, and so then. But it was a fun show to do. I mean, they were very nice. Every pressure show. I didn't want to do that trick on that show. Hell, I mean, I had scary enough times doing that a number of years before on Carson, and I was only in my 40s then or 30s or something like that. And but I mean, because it's a nerve-wracking trick to do, because you're trying to do pharaohs, and my hands are trying to shake on me for the very first time that's ever happened. I'm bracing them on the table and trying to make sure I get through them. I made it through, and but so yeah, that first time was fun, and they were great about it. They loved it, and they enjoyed doing it. And then they invited me back, and that was even better yet. So it's a fun show to do, and I enjoy the creativity aspect. I mean, for me, I view going on Penn and Teller Fool Us as performing at a magic convention, and I did performing at a magic convention. I got into that. We didn't talk about that, but I mean, I got into that early on, and with the Siegfried and Roy Magic Convention, and I've run a lot of different conventions over the years, usually adding a little twist to an existing trick or routine. And that's what I see Penn and Teller as. It's for me, it's like doing a magic convention for two judges, and, but I already know how they think, and now I got to play against what they think, against what I can do, and so yeah, I'm already working on.
Penn said something on one of the I think one of the episodes with you. He said something like, "When you're on, you were playing a different game, or you're playing another field." And I think he hit the nail right on the head. Other people are going out there and maybe doing their acts and doing their bits, and you're going out there and you're kind of saying, "Okay, what do Penn and Teller know, and what do they know I know, and what do I know that they don't know that they know I know they don't know." So it's definitely a very fun game that you're playing on there.
Yeah, that's exactly how I approach it, and they enjoy that aspect too. I mean, as long as it's something that really fools them, they like it. I think, I mean, every once in a while, I think they get fooled on something and they're not so sure about that, but that's exactly the game. Yeah.
Totally.
So.
So talk to me about the original Penn and Teller, although not really, but kind of the original getting on TV, which is getting on Johnny Carson. And just
Oh
to
yeah.
just to talk a little bit about it very briefly, one of the awesome patterns that I've got to see in interviewing so many magicians is how many origin stories started with seeing a magician on Johnny Carson. So it actually was the reason I said the original Penn and Teller, even though it's obviously not, but it was a place where not only many magicians got their starts, but many people became a fan of magic by seeing amazing magic on that show. So talk to me about that journey. I know you told a great story in your show about how you got on Johnny Carson. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, Carson was one of the places I remember seeing Mike Skinner on Carson, and even before that, I remember seeing Goshman and I believe Don Allen. When I saw like Al Goshman, I didn't know who he was. I just knew he was good because he was exposed. I was exposed to this kind of magic on the Tonight Show. My father had been a big fan of the Carson show, and so I would often stay up, and he'd let us stay up a little late and watch the beginning at least, and any magicians if they were on the show, of course. So what happened for me with the Tonight Show was, I think what had happened, Michael Amar had just moved to California, and he had gotten on the Tonight Show. Boy, that made me jealous. Michael and I were good friends and so on like that. And I was happy for him, really happy. But damn, he got on the Tonight Show, and I really everyone wanted to be on it, Johnny. And so I remember hearing Carson was going to retire, but I was living in Pittsburgh, and I wasn't moving to California. And I remember hearing that Johnny was going to retire, and I decided in my head that I wanted to get an answer, either a yes or I didn't want Carson to have retired without me having tried to get on the show. And I really didn't care whether I got as much of a yes or a no answer. It's just that I didn't want him to retire, and then I never tried. So I put a plan together, and I had just been on That's Incredible with on ABC, and so I had a little bit of a videotape of me doing a trick with a hot air balloon on TV. So I had a good TV tape, and I also heard Carson had mentioned something about doing something with Michael Landon at the Magic Castle, and Michael Landon said, "Yeah, you were showing me that coin trick," and so somewhere in my head, I got the idea that Carson liked coin tricks, and so I decided I was going to send out a video, and I put together a professional video with an editor. We edited that, and I added the coin trick. That's ridiculous to the performance. I just did it in the studio, and they taped it, and I packaged that up and I sent it out to NBC. Got the name of Carson Productions and whatever, and I decided I was going to phone call every single day, not every single day, every single week, and see if they got the tape. So I sent it out and I called and they said, well, sir, we get, 2,000 tapes a week and we'll take a look at it and let you know if we. But I figured I didn't have anything to lose. And I literally did call every Monday. I'd call and say, hi, this is Paul Gertner, magician from Pittsburgh. I sent out a video. I just wondered if you looked at it yet. And for about 3-4 months, it was, well, sir, we'll call you. We see. Thank you very much. Click. But eventually it was, I was getting the same receptionist, and she was saying, "You're the magician who keeps calling, huh?" I said, "Yeah." Just went. She said, "Actually, they did. Bob McCulley, the talent coordinator, looked at your video, and he said you're very, very good. And he says they might even show it to Johnny. So I was making headway. And a couple weeks, 2 weeks later, I think I got when I called. They says, "Hey, Carson," I actually got on with McCauley that time. She put me on. She said, "Let me tell Bob talk to you." He says, "Paul," he says, "I showed it to Carson. He came in raving about you. And he said, you're really, really good." And he loved the coin stuff. He likes coin tricks. And I said, okay. And he said, but, he says, "I have to tell you," he says, "that's all I can do." He says, "I showed your tape to Carson. He's the one that makes all the calls on magicians on the show." He said, "If you were a comedian, I could book you. But if you're a magician, it's all Johnny's call. So I can't do anything more." And I got off the phone, and I remember saying to my wife, Kathy, I says, "You know what I'll do? I'm going to send him a overnight letter using that new service called Federal Express, and I'm gonna send him a letter and say I'd love to be on the show." And she says, "I do not think you should do that." So what do you mean? She says, "Well, Johnny knows what you want." She said, "The question here is, what does Johnny want?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, didn't Bob McCulley say Johnny liked coin tricks and he liked your coin tricks?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Johnny wants to be a magician again." She says, "Send him a letter, talk to him all about coin tricks. Talk to him about palming coins and how many coins you were palming and what you were doing. Tell him how you did the trick, but don't say anything about being on the show." And I did. I sent a letter strictly that way and overnighted it. And they got it. And I called the next day, and Macaulay says, "Hey, I got your letter. It's a nice letter. I'm going to give it to Johnny when I have a production meeting with him." And I said, "Okay, fine. Thank you." And literally 3 hours later, I get a phone call. It says, "Mr. Gertner, please hold. Carson Productions, hold for Mr. Carson." And it was Carson. And he was on the other line. And that's what he wanted to talk about. He said, "Paul, beautiful coin magic." He says, "I can't palm 6 coins and do stuff like that. I can't." He says, "I'm playing around with it. I love coin stuff." He says, "And I've been doing the cards a long time, but I like the coin stuff too." And we talked for about 10 minutes maybe about magic and what do you do and where do you work, Paul. And he was very interested. And then he says, "Are you going to be out to LA anytime soon or anything?" I said, "Well, yeah, actually I got a trade show in about 2 weeks or 3 weeks." He said, "Well, I'll tell you what." He says, "Let me give you my number. Give me a call when you get in town and we'll get together." Had no idea what it meant. And I took his phone number down and said goodbye, and that was it. And then I did call a couple weeks later. I landed in LA for this trade show, and I called, and he didn't answer the phone. A housekeeper did, and I said who I was, and they says, "Oh, okay, fine, yeah." He got on, and he says, "So where you? What you up to?" And I said, "Well, I'm in town. I'm here at the airport. I just got in, and you told me to call you." He says, "Yeah, yeah." He said, "It was a Sunday afternoon." He says, when are you working?" And I said, "Well, my show's tomorrow. Today is just my rehearsal day, but I don't have to be there for, till this afternoon or this evening. I have to be down in Orange County." He said, "Well, you want to come up the house?" And I said, "Okay," And he said, "Okay, you got a pen? I'll give you some directions." And he gave me directions to Wildlife Road in Malibu. And I took the directions down, shaky. And I got off the phone, I remember, and I went back to the rental car counter because I had already rented my car. And I said to the guy, it was a budget renter car. I need a map. I said, he said, okay, where are you going? I said, Malibu. He said, Malibu? That's where the rich people are. He said, Malibu? Where are you going to see in Malibu? I said, well, actually, I'm going to see Johnny Carson. And his face just got big eyes. And he looked at me and he says, you're going to see Johnny? Kimmy, where, what address? He looked, Malibu Road, Wildlife Road. He said, you're serious? I said, yeah. I just talked to him on the phone. He said, what do we rent you? Give me your keys. You can't go to Johnny Carson's house in that piece of shit. But that's what he said. And he says, he rented me, they upgraded me to a nice big gray Cadillac. And he says, you're going to Johnny Carson's house in a Cadillac, and that's what we did. So I drove there and met Carson, and gates opened, and hung out with him for about 3 hours.
Wow. And then obviously went on the show multiple times.
I think I was on the show 2 weeks later. He flew me out again. As I was leaving, he said, hey, he said, beautiful stuff. He says, we actually, I showed him cups of balls and all different stuff and the coin tricks and that. And then he says, you know what? He says, my people will give you a call. And they did 2 days later, and 2 weeks later, I was on the show for the first time. And I did go on 3 times, yeah.
A few things just to comment on there that are great. The first is I love your wife's insight, which is that, as magicians, especially in the business world, we're often thinking of like me, and if just for a brief moment you think about what the other person wants, the headway, you can make headway very, very quickly. That's the first. And the second is, very interesting that giving away the secrets to some tricks to a confidant, or somebody who is interested in the art and passionate about the art, and no assumption that Johnny was going to go on and change career paths again, or something crazy like that, but just to say, hey, this is somebody who's interested in coin magic and interested in me because I have some unique knowledge in coin magic. And instead of saying like, hey, put me on the show, say the opposite. Say, hey, let's talk about the thing that we both love in common, and if I can help you out in a cool way, then that would be great.
Yeah, and it was definitely that, and the interesting thing was that's exactly what he was about, in terms of, if you ever watched shows with Carson, anytime there was a magician on the show, he would always send out a little subtle clue to the magic community that I'm one of you. And I remember him doing Doug Henning was on the show, and Doug Henning did something with the nudist deck that I mentioned earlier, the Hall's photography. And at one point, Johnny, right at the end, he just goes rough and smooth. And then one time when I was on, he picked up one of the dice and he vanished it very quickly, just at the end. Now, it wasn't trying to upstage me or anything like that. It was just a little cue to the magicians out there that, I'm hip. I'm one of you guys. I'm one of you. Exactly. I'm on the inside. And he used to do that all the time with magic or magic stories and things like that. Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. What a great moment in history, and how amazing that you were a part of it and got to share some amazing magic. And really, quite sincerely, that's some awesome spots on that show. Like some great hard-hitting magic that the world got to see and that Johnny got to see live. So thank you for that. That was incredible. I want to talk a little bit now about your show right now. A big group of us came down from Toronto to go see it. It was incredible. It was a great show. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight, which I guess kind of strange, but I thought that I wanted to highlight it, is how it felt. When I was a kid, you read magic books and you hear about magicians traveling the world to go see a magician do his center deal, or something to that nature. And it really felt like I came to Boston to watch Paul Gertner do his classic magic. And that felt great. It felt good not to say like, I've never heard or seen this before, but to say like, here I am live in person watching Paul do his cups and balls routine and watching Paul do his unshuffled. What an amazing moment that I only have ever seen on videos and seen on and things like that, which I think is an interesting lens to be able to see magic. And I really appreciated that. So I know that's a unique probably one closer for magicians than it is for some of the lay people that have come to see the show. But it was really fantastic. Lots of surprises. Talk to me a little bit about the show and this journey of putting this show together.
Well, yeah, it's. I mean, we ended up moving to Boston from Pittsburgh because my daughter lives here, and there are two grandkids down the street, and so we just, were ready to a change and moved here, and I have had in the back of my head always trying to do a little boutique show like this somewhere, but the Pittsburgh at the time I was there, I mean, I didn't really think it would support it in terms of being a big enough city and having enough traffic flow, enough tourists, and so on. But when we got to Boston, immediately looked around and said, this could work, you know. So, I mean, I basically went to every hotel in the city pretty much and knocked on lots of doors to find one that was willing to talk to me. And there were many, most of them were not, or they wanted too much money to rent a place. And it just was, you try to explain to them, this is going to take a while to build and so on. But fortunately, I happened to luck into the Omni it was actually one of those same moments. I was done. I looked 15, 20, maybe 30 hotels in Boston and got done that evening. And I was getting ready to get back on the subway. I looked down the street and I said, yeah, that's the Omni Parker House. What the hell? I'll give it one more shot. And I went down there and I happened to have hit. And it's another reason why, if you're working on something, but you're ever doing something, take that last shot, because it just sometimes works out. And in my case, what happened was there was a young lady there who was new in the meeting department. And, she said, well, what are you looking to spend? And we talked a little bit about budget. She says, well, I think maybe we can do that. She was looking for a business. She was new. She wanted business. And I'm saying, hey, I'll rent the room.
I'm business.
I'm business. I'll rent it, 3 times a month for the next 30, and I'll sign an agreement. And I did. So but basically that was the commitment, and it was a commitment on my part because I didn't have any tickets sold at all, and I'm renting a room, and spending quite a chunk of money right up front to say I'm going to rent this room 3-4 Fridays a month, and I did, and so it took a while to build. I think we started about 2 years ago in March, and at first we were just doing one show a night, a 7 o'clock show. With the intention of always adding a second show. And I had kind of negotiated the deal with the hotel based on that, knowing that if I added a second show, I wasn't going to have to spend a ton more money. And then eventually, after the Penn Teller thing hit, which it did, I think it did in the second year, I guess. Yeah, it hit in the second year. No, the first year, yeah, it clicked. And once that hit, boy, then the ticket sales went pretty quick. And then I was able to add a second show. There's already another really good show in town for Handed Illusions. They do more of a parlor show with, I guess, maybe about 50 seats, a couple rows. And so I wanted a close-up show. I wanted the exact same kind of experience that I had when I went to Eddie Fechter's. I sat at a big round table. Eddie sat at a big round table. I was one of the people, and people crowded around. People even stood on chairs to watch Eddie to get a chance to see him. He might have 30, 40, 50 people around him. And that's what I wanted. I wanted that kind of an experience for people. So that's what we did. We aimed it to be a close-up show. And essentially, I kind of looked at my abilities and I said, I do a nice job on stage. I've been doing meetings on stages and so on like that, but I'm not David Williamson. I'm not crazy and funny. I'm not, but in a close-up environment, that's where I shine. And that's what I wanted to be able to really highlight, the tricks that you mentioned, and to do a show that when people came, they literally were sitting right there at the table. And that's what we did.
That's what it looks like, and that's what it feels like, and it's a really incredible experience, and I highly recommend, if anybody is in town, near town, or can find a way to pass through town, to do it and to go see the show. Like I said, it felt like I'm going to see all of going to see Paul Gertner's stuff. It's like watching Billy Joel in concert. You know what I mean? like that's what it felt like. So
I'm glad you enjoyed that way and see it that way, because that's what I wanted to do, is be able to put all the best tricks together, and we're going to try to tweak it and change it this year. Starting in 2020, we're going to do add about 4 or 5 new routines. Now they're new routines to the people that come to the show. They're not new routines to me. I've been doing these routines for 20, 30, 40 years. And the hard part for me now is what tricks do I take out? I really am having trouble with that. But I'll get there. But the thing about the show is initially it was more of a combination, just the tricks. But from doing it every week and multiple times, now I've been able to add a little more of a storyline, a little more stories to the show. I guess when I say stories, I've found that I can kind of incorporate a little bit of stories about how a trick it came about, or how I got on Carson, or how that happened, a TV spot happened, or a little story about the grandkids and so on like that. Those are kind of like the slower parts of the roller coaster, because then the magic comes and hits them pretty hard, and then they go up and down the hill. But the fascinating thing about the show for me is I've gotten as many comments about we love the stories and the history and the little bit of, and that I learned, of course, from watching Ricky Jay doing 52 Assistants, because it wasn't just Ricky Jay plowing you over with hard hitting tricks, which there was a lot of that in the show, but his just listening to him talk was fun, and telling me about the history of the cups and balls and so on like that. And I've really tried to kind of make each trick have a little more of a value based on the story I tell about it beforehand.
I found myself connected to both the magic itself and stories like, for example, that Johnny Carson story, which left a great impression on me, because it touched on a lot of the things I'm interested in, which is kind of that oomph and not giving up, and asking people the right things in the right way, and things of that nature. So it was very exciting for me to hear that and remember that.
I was going to say, just real quick before you, since I know you like those angles, there's the one I sort of wanted to fit in the show, but I haven't always been able to. Well, the last time I was on the Tonight Show, they came to me and they says, "Hey, Johnny wants you to sit in the chair at the table, the panel." And I don't think I was able to do this in the show, in the Boston show. And I was excited because I hadn't gotten to do that yet, and that was always the big thing, to get called over to the desk. And so we were there, and right before I went out, they came to me and says, "Hey, Pete Fountain ran long," and they says, "We don't have time for you to go to the chair, to the desk," and that was okay. So I went out and did my spot, and at the very end, Johnny said goodbye. He shook my hands. He always came and sat with me at the center stage on the table, shook hands with me, and as he stood up, he went walking back to the desk, and I glanced back at Pete Fountain, and he looked me in the eyes, and he stood up and he moved over one chair and sat down. And I had like 30 seconds to decide what the hell to do. And because obviously they had told Pete Fountain the magician might come over, but they had just gotten done telling me, "No time, don't do it." I figured, number one, I remember this running through my head real quick. Johnny's retiring in about 3 months. He's not going to be on the show anymore. I'm never going to be on the show anymore. That's a window. And I just got up. I walked straight to the chair, sat down beside Carson. And I remember him looking at me and giving me a little okay sign. And it was right as we came out of commercial, he says, "We're back. Got magician here, Paul Magic. Great story. We got to move quickly, and thanks, Pete Fountain. Thanks." But I got the video and I got the shot of me at the chair. So anyway, I just always say to the people, whenever that window of opportunity opens, jump through it.
Totally. It's like what you said about the Omni Parker. Sometimes it's just the last moment you have one decision. Just do it. Just say yes and do it. It'll make a big impact. I love that. That's amazing. We are getting now towards the end of the episode, and with each episode we have some wrap-up questions. So some questions we ask each magician. So our first one is the endless chain. So in order to keep the podcast going on for eternity, each guest is asked to recommend another guest that we absolutely must have on the show, with the caveat that you got to be able to put us in contact. You can't just say David Copperfield. So who should we have on the show? Who would be a great guest on this podcast?
Have you had my friend Richard Turner yet?
We have not, and he is perfect.
Yeah, Richard would be great. He and I spent some good time together. I can put you in touch.
That would be amazing, amazing, amazing. The next section is about modern magic. So there's a lot going on in the world of magic right now, on TV, online, in person, at conventions, everything. What is one thing in the world of modern magic that you like that's happening right now, and one thing going on right now in magic that you don't like?
Modern magic. I really am fascinated and like the idea that somebody like Shin Lim may become a Siegfried and Roy superstar. I think that's so cool. And he's a close-up guy. He's a close-up magician. So I love that aspect. There was something going on that I'm not sure I like. I'm not sure I like it when I see magic on video or online, and I don't think the magician has that much of a depth of knowledge, and I think that they're just using the method of the trick for that's all they've got as the trick, as the whole thing, and they don't have, and they may not, and they just may not understand that yet. That they have to add that there's more to it than that.
I love that, and I think that's quite a positive way to comment on the insight of some of the magic that's happening online right now, and maybe a nice window in which someone who is creating magic online can view it and say, how do I make sharing this be about anything a little bit more than just me knowing the method and them not? Because with the internet, they will. So better to make it about something bigger or better. And the last and final thing is the take home point. So people have been listening to us talk about magic for about an hour now, and we've talked about loads of different things under the sun. And if people think back to this episode, they can remember many different things. What's the one thing that you hope magicians think back that stays with them, that they hold on to?
That they ask the question, why are they doing something? And I think that's one of the more important questions in terms of, why are you doing it, and find an interesting reason to be doing it, no matter what the trick is, and maybe if you can find some emotional content or connection that helps answer that question, then it becomes more interesting and it becomes about you, not just about the trick. It becomes about you, and it makes you more interesting too.
I love that, and I think anybody who's working on a show can ask themselves why they're doing what they're doing, and the more questions like that you ask, the better and more directed and more thoughtful the magic that you have will be. With that, we are at the end. Paul, where can people find you, both in person and online, to find out more about what you do?
If you want to check out my show in Boston, it's bostonmagictheater.com. Spelled either way, whatever way you spell it, it'll come up. Boston Magic Theater. And online, Gertner.com is my website. And yeah, we're lots of stuff's on YouTube, and we're working on some new stuff, and might even pop up on TV again. Who knows? We'll see.
Amazing. Well, we're excited to see whatever it is when it comes. With that, thank you so much for the interview, and thank you for the incredible show. Please, if you're in the area, go see it. It was incredible. And yes, thank you so much for joining me. And of course, thank you everybody at home for joining us and learning about magic and learning a little bit more about how to be a little better, and maybe how to get on our own Johnny Carson's, whatever that is. Thank you, Paul, and we'll see you all next Thursday. Well, there you have it. I hope you liked the bonus episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Thank you so much for being here. As always, it means the world. If you find yourself anywhere near Boston, see if you can go check out Paul's show, Miracles and Other Deceptions. You're going to love it. Other than that, thanks for being here. Your ears mean the world. Spread the word. Tell a friend. See you Thursday.